a love story for those haunted by innocent lost. They met on a Tuesday. Not the kind of day the world remembers. Not a wedding, not a storm, not a holiday, just a Tuesday. The kind of day where nothing was supposed to happen. And maybe that's why it meant everything. Because when the world isn't looking, something pure can slip through. He was reading alone in the corner of an old university library. She walked in looking for a phone charger. That's how it began. Not with fireworks or fate. With a dead phone battery and the one guy in the building who still carried an extra cord in his backpack. She smiled when he handed it to her. A soft, hesitant smile like she hadn't done it in a while. And he smiled back without even meaning to. That was the first thing he remembered about her, that smile. It stayed. It carved its way into him like a quiet, harmless little hook. He didn't know he'd never really be free of it again. They didn't speak for long, just a few sentences. But it was enough. Her name was Lenny. She was studying something vague and complicated. Political theory, maybe? He barely remembered. All he remembered was how she spoke like she was half in the room and half somewhere else. Like her body was present, but her mind was floating, always scanning for something that didn't quite exist. He found her again a few days later, this time outside, sitting under the same tree where the older students always gathered with coffee and gossip. But she wasn't with anyone. She was just watching. People. Clouds. Her fingers traced the spine of her notebook like she was thinking of drawing something but hadn't yet. He walked by without meaning to stop, but she saw him. And for reasons he couldn't explain, she smiled again, the same exact smile, and waved. From that moment on, he started counting time in smiles. They never made a plan. It wasn't a scheduled kind of love. It was the kind of thing that just unfolded. A conversation on a bench turned into hours. A shared coffee turned into sunset walks. One night they stayed at the campus art gallery until the janitor kicked them out. Neither of them liked the art. They just liked the silence. The kind where you sit near someone and don't have to fill the gaps, where the silence is the connection. She never talked about her past. He noticed that early. Any time he asked about home, her eyes would flick away like she was flipping through photos too painful to look at. "I moved around a lot," she'd say. "No one place stuck." But he noticed she never asked about his past either. Like they were both trying to build something forward without digging through the roots. And maybe that's what made it so innocent. Their love wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind that showed up in selfies or crowded bars. It was quiet. It lived in libraries and old bookstores. It stretched across long walks with one pair of earbuds shared between them. It folded itself into blankets and tea and the unspoken understanding that this, whatever it was, mattered. He remembered one night more than any other. They were lying on the grass behind the dorms, just far enough from the city lights that they could see the stars, barely. She turned to him and said, "I don't think I've ever been still this long." He asked what she meant. She paused, then whispered, "With you." I stopped running. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Her hand found his, and that was enough. It was that kind of love, the kind where stillness feels sacred, where you stop looking for the next thing because, somehow against all odds, you believe the person beside you is the thing. But nothing innocent lasts forever. He started to notice it in small ways. Missed texts. A softness in her voice replaced by static. Days when her smile didn't reach her eyes. And then one morning she didn't show up. No text, no explanation, just gone. He found her 2 days later in the art building stairwell, sitting on the steps like she was waiting for a verdict. Her hands were shaking. She looked up at him like she wasn't sure he'd come, like she'd expected him to forget. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice broke. He asked what was going on. She didn't answer, not really. She just looked at him like he deserved something she couldn't give. "There's a part of me you don't know," she said, "and I'm scared if I show you, you'll leave." He didn't leave. Not that day. He sat beside her, hands in his lap, and told her he didn't care about the part he didn't know, that whatever it didn't change how he felt. But deep down, he knew she didn't believe him, because Lenny had always loved like a ghost. She had floated into his life with a smile, and now he could feel her floating away again, not because she wanted to, because she didn't know how to stay. They made it another month. He tried everything: weekend trips, late-night talks, shared playlists, even writing her poems he never showed anyone else. But she kept pulling back. And one day, she didn't show up again. This time it wasn't a stairwell. It was final. Her dorm room was empty. Her number was disconnected. She didn't tell anyone goodbye. She just vanished. And with her, the part of him that still believed love could stay. He spent the weeks that followed trying to find her online. No luck. It was like she'd never existed. No photos, no tags, not even classmates remembered her last name. He asked the registrar's office. They had no records of a Lenny enrolled that semester. It didn't make sense, but nothing about her ever really had. Years passed. He dated, he worked, he moved cities, but she stayed. Not physically, emotionally. Her memory clung to him like fog. Every time someone smiled a certain way, every time a girl tilted her head when she laughed, every time a song from that semester played, she stayed. And he hated that. But also, he loved that. Because some stories don't end with closure. Some stories just pause. Forever. She had once told him, "In another life, we stay." And now he sometimes closed his eyes and imagined that life, the one where she stayed, where she never ran, where the library smile became a wedding photo, where they had a dog named August and a daughter named Mara, and she read bedtime stories in a voice only he ever got to hear crack. But that was another life. In this one, she was a ghost. And he was the boy who loved her anyway, even if she never came back, even if she never existed at all, even if it was all just a Tuesday. It had been 6 years, 6 cities, too many job titles and too many birthdays that felt like nothing. He had built a life, or at least a version of one, that people on the outside would call successful. A steady income, a minimalist apartment, a dog that didn't bark at strangers, even a set of friends who remembered his coffee order and showed up when his grandfather died. It all looked like it was working. But inside, the memory of Lenny had settled into him like dust between the floorboards, not enough to break him, just enough to linger. Some people talk about closure like it's a door you choose to shut. But some doors don't come with handles. Some just stay cracked forever. He hadn't said her name in years, not even to himself. But every time he walked past a cafe with a green awning, or heard a song with a string section and soft vocals, or smelled the specific mix of peppermint tea and rain, she surfaced. Not as a scream, as a whisper. The kind that pulls at your collar when you're trying to breathe. He thought he saw her once. It was a Tuesday again, because of course it was, and he was walking to the subway after a meeting that had drained the last inch of energy from his soul. And there she was, sitting by the window of a bakery, sipping from a chipped mug and looking out like the world had paused just for her. The same profile, the same nose. Even the tilt of her head matched the way Lenny used to lean when she was lost in thought. His chest locked. He stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, nearly getting bumped into by 3 people and a delivery bike. He stared. She didn't see him. She looked peaceful, but different. Older, yes, but not in a bad way. In the way time changes you when you've chosen your battles carefully. She looked like someone who had lived and survived and still believed in something. He stepped closer, but before he could get to the door, she stood up, gathered her things, and walked out the back. By the time he made it inside, she was gone. Just like before. He didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying it over and over again in his mind. Was it her? Was it just someone who looked like her? Had he imagined it? Was the ghost in his chest finally taking over his eyes? He didn't tell anyone. He just went back to the cafe the next day. And the next. For 2 weeks. He became a regular. The barista with the eyebrow piercing started calling him Early Gray because he always ordered the same drink and sat by the same window. But she never came back. And yet something had changed. It wasn't about finding her anymore. It was about what she represented, the version of himself that used to feel things with both hands wide open, the part of him that believed in slowness, in softness, in first smiles and shared earbuds. That version had gone quiet inside him, but maybe it hadn't died. Maybe it had just gone dormant. The cafe became his little chapel of memory. He started writing again. Nothing big, just fragments, observations, sentences he wished he could say to her, or to the version of her that lived in his chest. The words came slowly at first, like he was digging them out of wet cement. But they came. One entry read, "You were the only thing I never tried to fix. Maybe that's why you broke me." Another, "I see you in women who don't know they're beautiful and in music that doesn't try too hard." And another, "If you ever read this, I hope you know. I waited. Not on purpose. Just because no one ever made me stop." He started leaving the pages behind, tucked inside the cushions of the booth, slipped into used books on the cafe's free exchange shelf, folded into origami birds and left on the windowsill. He didn't sign them, didn't expect a response. It was just release. The only way he knew how to let go without actually letting go. One day he came in and found a folded napkin on his usual table. There was a message on it. Sometimes we disappear not to be forgotten, but to protect what was pure. I remember the tea. I remember the stars. His hands shook. He asked the barista who had left it. She just shrugged, said it was there when she opened that morning. No note, no name, no trace. It didn't have to be her. But it felt like her. And maybe that was enough. He never called them letters, not really. They were more like echoes, notes scribbled in notebooks, back pages of receipts, old napkins, sometimes the margins of conference agendas he didn't care about. They weren't meant to be sent, just spilled, written in a rush, as if the words would escape if he didn't trap them fast enough. They were always about her, or at least about what she left behind inside him, the ache that never hardened into anger, the tenderness that never turned bitter. There was something so quietly brutal about missing someone who never hurt you, who just left. He had a drawer full of these notes, folded, crumpled, unlined, aged by coffee stains and sunlight. They weren't poetry. They weren't profound. Some were just single lines like, "You used to squeeze lemon on my pancakes. I still can't eat them without wincing." Or, "I found a rock in my coat pocket last week. The one you said looked like a fish. I kept it." He wrote them at odd times, after waking from a dream that felt too real, or during slow subway rides when the noise faded just enough to hear himself. Sometimes he wrote after seeing couples laugh in bookstores or when a certain type of light came through the windows in early spring. They weren't consistent, but they were relentless, like grief disguised as memory, like healing that didn't want to be finished. One day, on a particularly restless afternoon, he gathered a stack of these unsent notes and decided to read through them. Not to relive, just to see if any of it still made sense. He sat on the floor, legs crossed like a child, heart heavy like an old man. The pages smelled of time. He read through the first 10 quickly, quietly, then stopped. One entry hit different. "You once asked if I thought we'd end up together. I said nothing. But my silence wasn't uncertainty. It was fear. You deserved more than a maybe from someone who couldn't say forever with a steady voice. He didn't remember writing it. But there it was, in his own handwriting, a version of himself that had once tried, truly tried, to be brave. He sat with it for a long time, wondering what might have changed had he just said it back then, had he chosen courage over caution. But time doesn't refund the words you never say. It just keeps the receipt. By this point, the cafe was like a second home. He had a rhythm. People knew him. One woman even brought her dog over just to say hello each morning. But even with the routine, the world felt quieter now. Not in a lonely way, in a reverent way. Like his memories had built a small church around him, and he'd learned to walk gently inside it. One Thursday, something new happened. He found another note waiting for him. Not on a napkin this time, but inside a used copy of The Little Prince, left in the donation pile. The handwriting was familiar, not hers exactly, but hauntingly close. You never looked for closure. That's how I knew you really loved me. He didn't cry. He didn't rush out. He just sat there with it. The weight of it. The truth of it. There was no return address, no signature, nothing else inside the book. But it cracked something in him. A good crack. The kind that lets light in. He wanted to respond, but not with more notes. This time he opened his phone and wrote a post, just a few lines, to no one and everyone. Some love stories don't end. They just pause in places we can't find again. And that's okay. Maybe love was never meant to be captured, just remembered. The post got shared, a lot. People commented, people messaged. Strangers told him about their own unfinished loves, their own ghosts, their own unmailed letters. And now, Uncle Luke here, leaning into this moment with you. If you've ever felt this kind of ache, the kind that grows quieter but never really leaves, then you're part of this story too. So take a second, drop a comment, and let someone else know they're not the only one who loved in silence. And if this story moved you, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and follow along. Because here at Uncle Luke Tells, we don't just remember the past. We honor it. Now, let's return. The last note he wrote, he didn't keep. He left it folded into the spine of a piano book at a thrift shop she once dragged him to. No one would ever find it unless they were looking for something else. Maybe that was the point. Maybe some confessions were meant to be hidden inside the everyday, not for attention, but for release. If you ever wonder whether it meant something to me, it did. It still does. But I'm learning to love the part of me you left behind. And that feels like a kind of peace. That night, he walked home without music, without distraction, just him and the city and the echo of footsteps that didn't feel as heavy anymore. It wasn't closure, but it was something better. It was surrender. And in that soft surrender, in that tiny decision to stop chasing ghosts and instead thank them, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. They say time heals all wounds. But they never say how long it takes, and they never say what happens when it doesn't. 3 years had passed since the last note, since the cafe, the folded paper in The Little Prince, the anonymous message that somehow felt more like a reunion than anything real life had offered. He had moved cities, changed apartments, deleted social media, stopped looking for shadows in windows or familiar silhouettes in crowds. But time wasn't kind. Time wasn't cruel either. It was just blank. Like waiting in a hallway for a door that never opens. Like waking up from a dream with the taste of someone's name in your mouth and forgetting it by noon. People called him stable, grounded, even happy. He smiled often, took care of himself, remembered birthdays. He was a good friend, a decent cook, a quiet neighbor. But no one knew how carefully he managed the silence, How some nights he left the TV on just to drown out the sound of memory rearranging itself in the dark. How he would walk for hours just to outpace a feeling that had no words. How he had become a museum of almosts. He didn't keep photos anymore, not because he didn't want to remember, but because remembering made it too easy to stay stuck. Instead, he painted. Not well, but enough to keep his hands busy. Small, abstract pieces, blue lines that bled into gray ones, shapes that looked like doors or wings, or maybe just tears if you turned them sideways. He didn't show them to anyone. They weren't for that. They were for surviving. One of those long nights, the kind that bends time, he found himself at a second-hand bookstore, the kind that stays open too late and never alphabetizes anything. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He just liked the smell, the comfort of old pages and forgotten dedications. As he reached for a book of Sufi poetry, something slipped out and fell to the floor. A postcard, unsent. On the front, a photo of a lighthouse swallowed by mist. On the back, a message. I thought forgetting you would set me free, but it only made me smaller. You held the parts of me I didn't know how to keep. No name, no address, just a sentence, written in blue ink, the kind she used to steal from hotel desks. He held it like it might disappear. He didn't take the book. He just kept the card, slid it into his coat pocket, walked home without looking back. That night, he pulled out his paints again. But this time, instead of gray and blue, he chose red, not the angry kind, the soft kind, like the blush of a memory that once felt safe. He didn't try to make shapes. He just let the color speak. And it did. That morning, he finally did something he'd been avoiding for years. He called her mother. He didn't expect an answer, but she picked up. Her voice was older, but warm. Like time had made her gentler, not colder. They spoke for 13 minutes. He asked how she was. She asked how he'd been. And then, just as the silence began to feel impossible, she said, "She lives in Italy now, works with children, still sings in the mornings. She never talks about you, but she still wears that silver ring. You gave her that, didn't you?" He didn't remember, but he said yes anyway. He thanked her, hung up, and sat still for a long time. Italy, children, singing. He imagined her in a sunlit room, surrounded by little voices, laughing like she used to when they danced in the kitchen at 2 a.m., barefoot and reckless. She was okay, and that hurt more than anything else ever had, because deep down, he had always hoped she wasn't, that maybe she was just as haunted, that maybe they were two halves of a story still waiting to be finished. But she had moved on. Beautifully. And now, he had to decide what to do with that. He didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, he took a walk. Same park. Same path. Same bench they used to sit on in the fall when the trees turned the world gold. He watched the leaves fall. Thought about how beautiful dying things could be. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the postcard. He read it once more, then tucked it under the bench. Let it go. Not for someone to find, but so he wouldn't carry it anymore. As the wind picked up, he whispered something into the air. Not goodbye, just this. Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. I'll never forget that. And the wind, in all its mercy, didn't ask for more. Some stories don't end. They just stop being told out loud. Years passed like a quiet tide, pulling him further from the shore of what once was. He didn't forget her. He didn't try to. But he stopped chasing the memory. It was no longer a wound, but something quieter. A scar that sometimes itched in the cold. Some days he'd still hear a song in a coffee shop or see someone with that same crooked smile, and it would feel like a ripple through time. But the ache no longer threatened to swallow him. It had become manageable, familiar. like an old friend who stopped visiting but never moved too far away. He had changed cities again, smaller this time, slower. He worked in a bookstore now, one with creaky floors and a cat named Maurice who refused to be polite. It didn't pay much, but it gave him peace. Mornings were quiet. He'd open the shop, water the ferns in the front window, and put on old records before anyone walked in. People knew him as the kind man with kind eyes who always recommended poetry to strangers who didn't know they needed it. But what no one knew, what even he rarely admitted, was that there was still a part of him that lived in the past. Not stuck there, just anchored. And it showed up one day in late spring. A girl, maybe 19, wandered in with wide eyes and an armful of philosophy books. She looked lost in all the ways he once was. After some conversation and the exchange of paperbacks and smiles, she lingered, then asked, "Do you think people ever really stop loving someone?" He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He simply said, "Number, I think we just learn how to carry it." She nodded like she already knew, and left. That night, he pulled out a box he hadn't touched in a decade. In it, a sketch she had drawn on a napkin, a faded concert ticket, a photo of her laughing with the sun behind her, and that silver ring her mother once mentioned. He had forgotten it had come back to him, forgotten how it ended up there. Maybe she had left it behind on purpose. Maybe the universe had quietly returned it to him. Either way, he held it like it meant everything and nothing all at once. Then he walked to the lake. It was calm that night, the kind of stillness that feels sacred. He didn't bring music or books or thoughts, just the ring. He whispered, "You were my favorite beginning," and let it sink. Not to erase her, but to finally let her live where she belonged, not in the past, not in the ache, but in the grace of having been loved at all. When he walked home, the wind didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a breath, a sigh, like something had finally exhaled. The next morning, he wrote a letter. He didn't know if he would send it, but he wrote it anyway. "I hope the mornings are gentle with you. I hope you still sing and still forget the lyrics halfway through. I hope the children you care for never have to learn what it means to lose something pure. I don't miss you anymore, but I carry you. In how I listen, in how I pause before I speak, in how I let people go with kindness instead of fear. You made me softer, and that saved me." He folded the letter, placed it between the pages of a book of poems by Rilke, and shelved it behind the counter. One day, he might give it away, or forget where he placed it. That didn't matter. It wasn't about being found. It was about being finished. They say grief is love, with nowhere to go. But sometimes love finds its own place, not in reunion, not in fairy tale endings, but in the quiet dignity of having happened at all. So if you've ever loved someone who didn't stay, if their name still lingers in your mind when you're tired or honest or alone, know this: you're not broken for remembering. You're not weak for wishing. You are the proof that love, even when lost, leaves something behind, and maybe, just maybe, that's the real happy ending, even if no one tells the story. Even if the world never hears it, you do, and that's enough. Uncle Luke tells. Now tell someone else, before silence takes it too.